This is apropos. Well, they're polling so close that analysts say the outcome is impossible to predict. A liberal pro-European mayor is facing off against a staunch nationalist conservative in Poland's runoff presidential election this Sunday, leaving voters with a stark ideological choice. As our correspondent Clifford Cragg reports, surveys suggest that if only younger voters had been allowed to cast a ballot in the first round, neither of those candidates would have made it through to the second.
If there are still some posters of Adrian Zandberg visible in this small western Polish town, it's thanks to Bartosz Kornacki, who campaigned tirelessly for the left-wing candidate.
No niestety, zajebane po raz kolejny.
He says he was fighting a losing battle with fans of the far-right Sławomir Mencen, an ultra-liberal economist whom Bartosz used to support.
Byłem zwiedziony tą...
He convinced me with this dream that I would get rich if only I worked hard. But I got a reality check when I lost my first job and was broke. I basically got zero help from the state. And if Mencen had been in power, it would have been even worse.
W kraju pana Mencena kończyłoby się to jeszcze gorzej.
Poland's youth are frustrated, he says, not to be benefiting more from the country's remarkable economic growth.
Stać nas na to.
We are now the world's 21st biggest economy. We could afford to have better working conditions, but we don't see the same policies over here as we see in other EU countries.
Zobaczyć w innych krajach Unii Europejskiej.
With property prices here rising twice as fast as wages, Bartosz was attracted by Zandberg's promise to build affordable housing.
I have a decent salary, around the national average, yet I'm still renting and spending more than a third of my income on rent.
Among under-30s, the leftist candidate came in second, with the far-right Mencen in the lead. Both benefited from an anti-establishment mood among frustrated youth.
I voted for Zandberg. We're fed up of both the main parties. They are all liars.
Far-right and far-left often coexist within the same couple here, though it's more often the other way round.
Mencen wants to punish women for having abortions. I think his supporters don't know what they're actually voting for. They just see on TikTok how he's got his own bar and brewery.
These young women said they would vote for Trzaskowski in the second round as the pro-EU and pro-Ukraine candidate. But others here told me they mistrusted both Brussels and Kiev and would vote either for the nationalist Nawrocki or for no one at all.
For more on what's at stake, we're joined now by Radosław Markowski, Professor of Political Science at the Polish Academy of Sciences. Thanks so much, Professor, for being with us this evening. So those anti-establishment younger voters that were featured in that report, have they become an important voting bloc heading into Sunday's ballot? And where do you think they're likely to turn?
They are important, and they turned recently much more actively than, some 10 or 15 years ago. Unfortunately, however, the youngest group, meaning 18-30, currently in Poland are only half of the real numbers that were in place 20 or 25 years ago. So they are active, they have their preferences, but they are not as numerous as my age group.
And if we talk about different age groups then, is that kind of anti-establishment mood that they were expressing, is that limited then to younger voters, or are we seeing that reflected right across the electorate?
Well, we would need a lot of time to explain the details of that. But let me maybe say something that the important thing in this election is that, over the past year and a half, Poland has been trying to restore the constitutional order and the rule of law, which were violated during the 8 years from 2015 to 23. So the current elections are primarily about this, whether Poland will fully return to the family of civilized countries of liberal democracy or not. And young people in particular are very much interested in that. One should remember that the Polish president, unlike the French, has limited prerogatives. Poland is a parliamentary cabinet democracy, and executive power lies with the government and the prime minister. However, the president can either help that democracy realize its goals or hinder it, possessing certain veto powers and other obstructionist tools. And if you look at the supporters of the two candidates, and also of the parties that are behind them, it is clear that Rafał Trzaskowski, the pro-European, supportive of European integration, multilateralism, tolerance of diversity person, a clear supporter of Ukraine in its war against Putin, has much more support of the younger generation than Karol Nawrocki, who represents fundamentally different option, clearly anti-European, supportive of politics of hostility towards diversity, both ethnic, national, and cultural, and also uncritical pro-Trump stance, and in a way recently it turned out also an anti-Ukrainian and anti-European approach, including the defense integration of European Union. So the youngsters are mainly on the side of the progressive liberal cosmopolitan candidate, but obviously they had their first sincere voting preference with those ultra-leftist or ultra-rightist candidates who did not make it to the second round.
And if Nawrocki is successful on Sunday, what would you expect there in terms of how disruptive he might be towards Donald Tusk? Would it be more so than his predecessor has been? And also, how much power does the president actually have in Poland?
Well, these are the people who are in line with peace. That is the party that has violated the basic principles of the Polish constitution and has alienated most of our allies in the European Union. They're absolutely uncritically pro-American, pro-US, and in particular pro-Trumpist. So yes, they will be, if elected, apart from the moral problems and all kinds of CV problems that we have with this candidate, he will definitely be an obstructive force against Tusk government. But again, as I've mentioned at the beginning, his powers are limited to distraction. He has no positive power to make things happen, to accomplish certain policies, unless he collaborates with the government.
And you mentioned Donald Trump there. He has, of course, thrown his weight behind the nationalist candidate, and he sent his Homeland Security Secretary to Poland, Kristi Noem, sent to a meeting of the conservative pressure group, the CPAC, where she offered a strong endorsement. We might just take a listen to a little bit of what she had to say.
If you elected a leader that will work with President Donald J. Trump, the Polish people will have an ally strong that will ensure that you will be able to fight off enemies that do not share your values. You will have strong borders and protect your communities and keep them safe and ensure that your citizens are respected every single day. You will continue to have a U.S. presence here, a military presence, Fort Trump, that we can work together for the security of both of our nations.
Yeah, Radosław, Donald Trump dangling the prospect also of closer military ties if the nationalist candidate does become president. Is that having any kind of influence over voters in Poland?
It might have, but my advice would be to the lady that she first of all looks into her president, namely, a president which 3 days ago miraculously discovered that maybe there is something wrong with Vladimir Putin, whom he admires so much. So, I'm coming from a country in which rank and file secondary school pupil knows that there is something wrong with Vladimir Putin, and this kind of advices by President Trump, who actually supports precisely all those forces in Europe, Orban, Salvini, the Spanish Vox, not to mention more, who are supportive or totally dependent on Russia and Kremlin. So, it might play a role for some, but those people who are better sophisticated in international politics would have doubts whether this makes sense. Americans are here anyway, and I don't think the choice of a president one way or another would either enhance this presence or not. I don't think so.
And finally, Professor, we're hearing that the outcome of this election could have implications for Poland's relations with the EU, with Ukraine. Would you agree?
Well, definitely, as I've said at the beginning, the foreign policy is run by the government and by Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, but definitely it could jeopardize some initiatives. For instance, Karol Nawrocki is at odds and he doesn't really want to get into the boosting of the so-called Weimar Triangle between Paris, Berlin and Warsaw, which is so important for Poland. And also they have this strange kind of initiatives which sound pretty infantile, that, we should establish some kind of trimare, the coalitions, instead of joining with major forces in the European Union, we should establish, which is supported by Trump and America, we should establish closer links with Georgia, Moldova, Lithuania, and the like. With all due respect to these countries, we have good relationships with them, but it cannot be at the expense of the European Union relationships, for sure.
Okay, Professor, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for being with us, though. That is Radosław Markowski from the Polish Academy of Sciences.